All right, guys, today we're going over the fifth and final act of Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmond Rostand. So, quick recap of what happened in Act 4. Remember, Act 4 took place completely on the battlefield at Arras, right? And Roxanne ended up showing up at the battlefield. And while she's there, Christian actually figures out that Cyrano loves Roxanne and essentially tells Cyrano, like, you got to tell her so that she can pick between the two of us. So as Cyrano is about to do that, Christian dies before he can confess his love, making it so that Cyrano can really never tell Roxanne that he loved her. And the scene ends with Cyrano running into battle, and that's it. We don't know if he survives or not. So, Act 5, the setting is 15 years later. Okay. And it is outside the convent of the Sisters of the Holy Cross. So, a convent is a place where nuns live. And this is where, after Christian died, Roxanne went and lived at this place. She became a nun and is essentially lived a life of mourning her dead loved one. And so there are some nuns walking around in the background, and we hear them talking about who would you guess? Cyrano, and how he's just such an awesome guy. He has come and visited Roxanne every week for the last like 10 years or more, and they just think that's incredible, right? So, again, just another testament to how awesome of a human Cyrano is. So, Roxanne and De Guiche come into the scene and they've kind of made up, right? Like, De Guiche asks Roxanne if he has forgiven her, and she says, I'm here, right? Meaning, like, I wouldn't see you if I didn't forgive you, hadn't forgiven you. And he asks, are you still loyal to Christian's memory? And she's like, yes, I carry his farewell letter that was actually written by Cyrano on, like, in this little pouch around her neck. And she's wearing black mourning clothes. And as they're chatting, Lebray shows up. And we remember Lebray is Cyrano's best friend. And he's worried. He's like, guys, Cyrano's really not doing well. He's poor. He's old. And, like, he's got a lot of enemies from living his life the way he has, which Cyrano has really high principles, and he calls other people out who don't follow the principles that they say they have. You know what I mean? Like calling out hypocrites. And so, Lebray is essentially just saying we should be kind of keeping an eye on him. And the De Guiche actually says, you know what? Like, respectfully, I don't feel bad for Cyrano, like, and we shouldn't, because he lives the life he chooses, right? And they all agree, like, yes, this is true. No one has forced his hand. He lives the way he wants to. And then, kind of just between De Guiche and Lebray, De Guiche says, I have heard at court that, like, there are some pretty powerful people who want him dead, so we need to keep an eye on him. And Lebray's like, absolutely, I'm 100% there with you, so I'll keep an eye on him. But before Lebray can leave, Roxanne and De Guiche are talking, and Ragueneau comes into the scene, and he's visibly distraught. He's, like, upset, and he says to Lebray, you will never guess what happened. Like, Cyrano's been attacked by these lackeys. They smacked his head with a log from, like, a window, so they kind of sneak attacked him, and his skull was crushed, and he's dying. And Lebray's like, oh crap. So they both run off to go try and find Cyrano and, like, be with him. And so then De Guiche ends up leaving as well. And Roxanne's just waiting, because today is the day that Cyrano usually comes and visits her. So she's got her embroidery, knitting stuff, and she's just sewing under the tree, and it's getting late, and she's like, I wonder where Cyrano is, right? Like, she's got a chair all ready for him. And who do you think shows up but Cyrano? Now, he doesn't look great, right? He's not bleeding or anything, but, like, he's not doing well. He's pale, he's obviously in pain, but Roxanne doesn't notice. So they kind of go on like they normally would, and he tells her, like, sorry I'm late, but I'm not going to be able to stay very late. Like, I need to leave before dusk, right? And Roxanne's like, yeah, whatever. You showed up late. You can tell whoever you need to meet. Like, that's not my problem. And it's kind of funny. And him saying that he needs to go by nightfall is foreshadowing. What do we think that could be foreshadowing? So, um, Roxanne reminds him, like, yo, you got to tease these nuns, right? Because there are just nuns kind of walking around while they're chatting. And Cyrano, who is not a religious man, actually turns to one of the nuns that he gives a hard time to and says, like, I will let you pray for me tonight at Vespers. More foreshadowing. Why would he allow her to pray for him if he doesn't usually? Um, and then after that, Cyrano starts giving Roxanne that news report that he always gives her, right? He always gives her kind of it's kind of like what you would find in like People magazine, right? And as he's giving his summary, he actually passes out, and Roxanne like runs to him and is like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on?" And he comes to and he's like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. It's an old wound." What do you think that old wound is? A wound, like a real wound, or a wound of the heart? And it's Roxanne, speaking of hearts, touches where her farewell letter is from Christian and is like, we all have old wounds. And Cyrano reminds her, like, hey, you said that you would let me read that letter someday. And Roxanne's like, what? Like, you want to read it now? Again, more foreshadowing. And he's like, yes. And so she lets him start reading it. And it's like getting dark out, right? So he can't see super great. I'm just not tech savvy, so I couldn't change the background. And she says it's tear stained and blood stained. And she gives it to him, and so he starts reading it, and as it's getting darker, Roxanne's like, how is he still reading this letter? Like, he can't possibly see what it's saying. And it clicks in her head, because now that she can't see Cyrano very well because it's darker outside and she can hear his voice, all of a sudden she's like, oh my gosh, it's you. It's been you the whole time. And she asks him, like, why did you keep this quiet from me? And he's like trying to deny it, but like she knows the truth. And um she was like, those tears on the letter must be yours. And Cyrano just comes back with, well, yeah, but the blood belonged to Christian. And so um as they're kind of having this interaction, Labray and Raganu come in and they're like, dude, Cyrano, what are you doing here, bro? Like, you should be in bed. And this is where he takes off his hat and he shows Roxanne the bandages, and it's bloody, and you can tell that like he shouldn't be up and around. And it explains kind of why he looks the way he does. And then from here, he gets really kind of woozy, and the scene really becomes dramatic. Essentially, it's a long death scene. Cyrano dies, but before he dies, he's like reciting poetry, and he's trying to stand up, saying, like, I will not die lying down. And he actually says that he can see death staring at his nose, right? Which is like a form of personification and or an illusion, right? To death being a human. And, he's trying to fight these enemies that he says are lies and prejudice and cowardice and stupidity. And right before he actually dies, right? He's collapsed. Labray and Raganu are holding him, and Roxanne kisses him on the forehead, and then he says, um, I have been taken down by my enemies, but I will carry one thing that no one can take away from me to heaven. And Roxanne asks, like, what is it? And he says, my white plume. And we will talk a little bit more about what all of that means in our next session. But that, my friends, is the end of Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmond Rostand.